Last week we looked at a two-part strategy in how to fully experience joy and happiness in our life, to have it almost overflowing, to have it in abundance, so it was complete. And that two-part strategy was just connecting to Jesus and connecting to one another. It's not an optional extra. It's the only prescription that Jesus has given us. We don't have another way to get there. Our mental health, our emotional well-being, that sense of true joy and happiness is connected to God's way of doing life. Now, that's so much easier when people are nice. I was watching this program on TV about these grey nomads that were travelling around Australia. And wherever they went, they put up this sign in the campsite and it said, "Be nice or leave." Right? Well, we can't do that. God didn't give us that as an option. He wants us to love everyone the same, irrespective of how people treat us. So how do we do that in reality? How do we take what Jesus has called us to do and express that to people that sometimes don't treat us well? I was thinking about the words of Jesus when he said, "Love one another." And it's to a level where he loved. And that's a place that is different to how our world treats each other. Do you know, even in marriage, there are some days that it's a whole lot easier to love our spouse than other days. And if you're sitting there right next to he or she, your partner, that's not the time to nod and agree, right? Just acknowledge that that's true. But that's not the sort of love that Jesus was talking about. He was talking about a love that is about moral and social love in action. It's like we sat here. It was a live Zoom meeting on Thursday night with our board, and Linda needed a bed picked up from Now. And as I just, on this live Zoom board meeting, I said, "Does anyone know someone that could pick it up?" And straight away, Mark is up and away and is able to get that bed for Linda. That's love in action. It's when all the extra COVID restrictions have put more pressure on our team and how we do things and how we stick within the rules and how we negotiate that and keep a sweet spirit. That's that love in action. It's like on Friday when Pete and Jordan took a load of firewood to Swifts Creek. That's what it looks like. But how do we love people that have hurt us, that have let us down, that have betrayed us, that have done the wrong thing by us, that are just not nice, that annoy you, that frustrate you, that press all the wrong buttons and get on your nerves? How do we do that? Well, in Jesus' own leadership team, he chose a guy that sold out on everyone. He actually walked away, and after 3.5 years of being part of a team where Jesus expressed love to him, he saw Jesus healing people, feeding people, being kind to people, and answering his questions, even saving his life when he was going to be drowned in a Lake of Galilee when a big storm one night. Jesus saved his life. And the night that Judas walked out on the team, walked out on Jesus to betray him, even as the door was swinging, as the rest of the team are shocked and thinking, "What just happened? How could Judas walk out on us all and go and betray Jesus?" That's the moment that Jesus turned to the boys and he says, I've got a new command for you, a new prescription, to love one another as I have loved you. It's an amazing that's the moment that Jesus called us to love in the face of betrayal. In the opening verses of the whole Bible, there is a whole description on creation. And there are 50 chapters in the book of Genesis. And Moses, who records all this, he spends 3 chapters on creation. But what amazes me, he spends 13 chapters on the story of a young kid, a 17-year-old boy that gets sold into slavery. It's a story of a family that's dysfunctional, of violence and lies and cover-ups. It's a story of bad parenting, of favoritism towards one child against the others. It's a story of broken relationships, but a story of restoration of a family. And in this story of Joseph, we actually can find our story. If you've been hurt by someone, if you've been let down by someone that should have been the person that looked after you, should have been the person that you could have trusted, then you felt what Joseph has felt. Now, many times in the story of Joseph, Moses records these words, and God was with him, and God was with him. Do you know that that's a commentary? It's an added on thing that Moses described. It's not what Joseph necessarily felt at that moment. When Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, I don't think he felt like God was with him. When Potiphar's wife wrongly accused him of rape and he's thrown into Egyptian dungeon, I don't think he felt God was with him. But we're going to just jump forward 20 years from when he was sold into slavery. And we find now Joseph is the most powerful, the man with the greatest authority in this mighty Egyptian nation, second only to Pharaoh. And the 7 years of plenty that he prophesied, that he interpreted a dream would happen, has happened. And now they've entered the beginning of the 7 years of drought, of famine, and they're 2 years into it. And Joseph, he's in charge of all the overseeing of the grain that's sold into his nation. And now people start coming from other countries, neighbouring countries, because they're desperate. And there's a day that happens that it was just an ordinary day, but it was a day that Joseph had imagined. Could it happen? Would there be a day when he would actually see his brothers again? And what would happen? And I don't think anything could prepare Joseph fully for this day, when his 10 half-brothers travel the 400 kilometres from Canaan to Egypt, and they arrive and they're desperate. Their families are desperate for food. And this is the day that Joseph sees them for the first time in 20 years. They don't recognise him because he speaks through an interpreter. He's speaking Egyptian. He looks like Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. They think he's just an Egyptian, clean shaven. They got the Jewish beards all happening, and Joseph does not reveal who he is to them. I don't know if you've ever walked down the street and you've seen someone you weren't expecting, someone that's hurt you in the past and you've had nothing to do with them. I don't know if you've turned a corner in an aisle and seen someone that you don't want to see and you think, well, they didn't see me, and you go into the next aisle and avoid them. Well, whatever you felt in that moment, Joseph probably felt 1,000 times worse than that. Well, 100 anyway, right? But he certainly was caught by surprise. And his brothers don't recognise him, and I don't know what would have happened if they had. But all I can tell you is how Joseph responded to them. And he treated them initially quite harshly. He accused them of being spies. Why have you come here? What are you trying to do? He actually had them thrown into prison for 3 days. Why would he do that? It wasn't about revenge, because if he wanted to be revengeful, he could have done a whole lot worse than that. And he had already forgiven them. So why would he do that? And the reason I know that he'd already forgiven them, as later on that when he eventually reveals himself to them, he says these words: "It was to save lives that God sent me here ahead of you." That's a God perspective. You can't see through God's eyes a situation like Joseph is describing if you haven't walked through forgiveness. Some of you have been hurt by someone really close to you, and you know how hard it is to walk through forgiveness. When we first left Bairnsdale and went up to Sydney, we were involved in a church up there and involved in ministry with a friend. But in the 2 years we were there, it just didn't work. And I hurt him, and he hurt me. And after 2 years, we left, and our friendship looked like it was destroyed. And I can't fully explain what happened, but we both hurt each other. And I can remember in the months later, we shifted to another area, and we're about an hour away from where we had been living. And I got to a place where I needed to go see him. I needed to go say sorry to him. And so I drove to his house. I didn't tell him I was coming. And I walked in the gate to his, front yard there. And he came to meet me. He was already in the yard, and he's walking towards me. And I put my hand out to shake his hand. He refused to shake my hand. He just kept walking. And he put his arms around me. And he hugged me. It's a hug that I'll never forget, because he had already forgiven me, and I had already forgiven him, and Joseph had already forgiven his brothers, Potiphar's wife. You don't need someone to be physically present in front of you to have already forgiven them. And I know that Joseph had done that he had chosen to let go of all the years that he should have been getting married, having kids. He chose to write off a debt that he was not going to hold against them. It was a debt that he was writing off. It was a debt that you couldn't really extract back. You couldn't ever change the past. And long before Joseph ever walked out of that physical prison, he was set free from resentment, from hatred, from anger. It was gone long before he ever was set free physically. Forgiveness is not denial. Forgiveness takes us on a journey where the memory of what happened has no longer any pain associated with it. We're set free. Nelson Mandela made this statement. He said, "Resentment is like drinking a poison and hoping it will kill your enemies." He also said, "Forgiveness liberates the soul. It removes fear. That is why it is such a powerful weapon." Nelson Mandela was sentenced to 27 years imprisonment for his role in trying to pull down the apartheid regime in South Africa. He spent the first 18 years in a tiny little cell with no bed to sleep on, a bucket for a toilet. And eventually in 1990, he was released from prison. And once he was released, he set about restoring and bringing together unity of enemies, of bringing people together, of bringing health relationally to his nation. And 3 years later, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. 4 years after he was released from jail, he became the first black South African president of his nation. It's an amazing story. But if someone else, if a he or a she or they is the reason for where your life is right now, if the problem for you is outside of you, then you're a victim. And you can't change anything because you're waiting for them to change. But forgiveness gives you back the power. Staying a victim may leave you feeling morally superior, but it won't change what you're going through. And Joseph had already forgiven them. So what's he doing? Why is he treating them so harsh? Well, when Jesus answered a question that Peter asked him, Peter asked, how many times should I forgive someone? And Jesus gave him an answer that was a number that was too big to count. Once you start down that path, you just keep forgiving. But when Jesus was dealing with people who mistreat you, that misuse you, that want to extract something from you, he didn't give a number like that. In fact, when he was talking about this, he said, if someone asks you to go 1 mile, and he's talking about Roman soldiers forcing Jews to carry all their luggage and stuff, their heavy stuff. He said, if someone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. He didn't say just keep walking till you drop. He didn't give a number that was big. He gave a number 2. And he said, if someone like smacks you in the face, turn the other cheek. If they do it again, run. He didn't say just stand there and just get your face pummeled, right? And so Joseph, what he's doing is seeing if they have changed. He's testing them to see how he can respond, how he can restore relationship with them. The forgiveness, well, that's already taken place. But forgiveness and reconciliation aren't automatic, especially in abusive situations. They don't even have to go together. Trust, when it's been violated, takes time to be re-established. You need to see it in action, not just in words. Jesus said that you'll know them by their fruit. So Joseph has them thrown into prison for 3 days, and he's told them that he's going to release one of them to go back home, and the rest of them will stay there until he finds out that they're telling the truth, that they do have a younger brother, that their father is still alive. But on the 3rd day, when he releases them from prison, he changes his mind. He says to them, I'm going to keep one. And he keeps one there. He keeps Simeon there. And he says, the rest of you go back, but you can't buy anything more from Egypt. You can't get any more supplies unless you come back and prove you're not spies by bringing your youngest brother, Benjamin. This is his full brother. This is the brother Joseph desperately wants to see. And he says, this is the deal. He lets them go, but he has a secret little plan. And he stacks their money, their silver that they've paid for the grain, in the tops of their bags. And when they get back to their dad, they discover that they've all put their money back in their bags, and they're in panic mode. What's happened here? And they tell their dad everything, and that Simeon has been kept back in the dungeon. And his dad goes, that's it. Simeon, I'll never see. He's dead now. You're never going to go back. You're never, ever going to take Benjamin with you. That's never going to happen. But see, life has a way, reality has a way of getting us to face what we don't want to face. Because Jacob couldn't stand the thought of something happening to his one and only son from his beloved wife. He's already lost Joseph. In his mind, Joseph's dead. And so he can't face this potential loss. But the starvation they're facing eventually forces them, and they go back this 400 kilometres. They walk this back into Egypt. And when they get back, they explain that somehow their money has got back in their bags, and the guy that they tell to, he says, that's okay, your God must be looking after you. And Joseph feeds them, and he looks after them. He talks to them again through an interpreter. Now, previously, when he'd been asking them whether Benjamin was alive, he was so overcome with emotion he had to walk out of the room. This time, he asks further, and again, emotion overwhelms him, and he hides the emotion, but he treats them harshly still. And then he sends them on their way. And this time, as they're going back the second time, all loaded up with their new supplies, he does something quite remarkable. He gets his servants to hide his own special cup, the cup that the second most powerful man in Egypt drinks from, into the bag of his full brother, his younger brother. And it's hidden, and as they're going back to their country, Joseph's soldiers go charging after them and search them to see if they've stolen anything. And when it's found that Benjamin, in his sack, is this stolen cup, they're all taken back to Egypt and again brought before Joseph. Now, this time, Joseph says to them, I'm going to let you all go, but the youngest, you're going to stay here and you're going to be my slave. You're going to be imprisoned for the punishment of stealing this, which he hadn't stolen as a setup. And this is where Joseph sees changes in his family, and his oldest brother, Judah, steps up and he says to Joseph, not knowing it's his own brother, he said, take me in the place of the young boy. Let him go back, because our dad would die of grief if he lost Benjamin. Take me. I will be your slave. Take my life. Seeing the change in his brothers, Joseph was overwhelmed with emotion. He sent out all the rest of the crew that were hanging around, so it could just be him and his brothers, and no longer speaking through an interpreter, speaking in Hebrew to them face to face. He says, this is Joseph. This is me. Come closer. Look at me. Come closer. I want to read you his words that he wrote, that he said. He says, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be dismayed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God has brought me ahead of you. And he speaks to them more and he says this, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. They all go back home to bring their aged dad back, to bring all the families, because the drought is going to continue for another 5 years. And so they all go back home to share this news that Joseph is alive, and come back and live in Egypt, and you'll be fully supplied. And on the way back, Jacob can hardly believe that this is true, but he's going there. He's old now. And on the way, God speaks to him. And God speaks to him prophetically, and he says these words, and Joseph, one day his hands will close your eyes. God was telling Jacob that it's true. Joseph is alive. The family is going to be brought together again. And one day when you die, it will be Joseph, the son you thought was lost and gone. He will close your eyes. He will do that. The day that Dad died, I had to go back to Sydney. And 3.5 hours before he died, I said my last farewells to Dad, and I left. And when Dad died, my brother Ken and my little sister Lindell were there. And it was Lindell that closed Dad's eyes. Lindell, the one that for the last couple of years of Dad's life would ring him every single night and pray with him and say goodnight to him. And as I was driving back to Sydney, never to see my dad again, Coral was driving down and she was hoping to say her last goodbyes to Dad. And we had arranged to meet wherever we met on the road. And it just happened that as I drove into a place called Breadbow, Coral was driving to Bedbrow, whatever. And we'd organised to stop and swap cars and swap things around. And as we pulled up, halfway between Bairnsdale and Sydney, that's the moment that Ken rang to say that Dad had passed away. And in God's grace and mercy, Coral and I were standing beside each other at that moment where we could help each other, comfort each other. I wasn't there to close Dad's eyes, but I was there to hold my wife when we got the news. And then Coral then drove on to Bairnsdale. They didn't take Dad's body away. They kept his body there so Coral could say goodbye to him in the house. And the reason I tell you this is because family is important. The detail is important. It was God that said to Jacob, Joseph will close your eyes, because there's a power in relationships that are restored. There's a verse in Psalms that says that the lonely God places in families. I don't know everyone's story, but I know there's a God that loves, and he wants us to express his love to each other, to be gathered in families. We don't all have the same surname, but we are able to love each other if we stay connected to Jesus. It's impossible without him, but it's possible with him. Even when people let us down, even when people hurt us, that forgiveness, understanding healthy boundaries, re-establishing relationships when people are changed, even when trust is lost, that is all possible. People can change. Families can be restored. There are Christians in Bairnsdale right now that are disconnected from their church family because they've been hurt and damaged, and I understand that. But I believe Redgum can be a safe place. That in Redgum people can be healed and whole and restored relationally. That change can take place. Jacob lived another 17 years with his family restored. That they were able to be together. That they were able to be fruitful and multiply. In fact, that's the way that Moses described what happened. All through Genesis, God is promising people that they would be fruitful and multiply. He's commanding them to do it. But in this story, for the first time in the Bible, these words are written. And Moses writes this, and he says, now the Israelites settled in Egypt and in the region of Goshen. They acquired property, and there they were fruitful and increased greatly. That's God's heart for you. It's God's heart for us, and we're going to do that together. There's one person in this room. It's my brother Jeff. And Jeff is probably my best friend. We've been through a lot of experiences in life together. But I have hurt Jeff. I've disappointed him. I've let him down. I've betrayed his trust in me in the past. But the power of forgiveness. I'm not the person that I was those years ago when I really damaged Jeff. God changes us. That's the whole point of this. We don't have to stay the same. Relationships, family restored is really, really powerful. It's important. And that's partly why Jesus called us to love one another, so that we can experience that for real, for reality in our lives.